Okay, I get that buying a new camera is exciting, especially on Black Friday when you can save tons of money. But I want to make this video as a reminder that gear is not everything, because to take photos you're proud of, you don't need a new camera. You need to learn a certain skill. And a new camera is not going to teach you that skill. And I made the same experience the hard way when I used to believe that buying a new camera would level up my photography as well. Because over the last 5 years, I've bought 4 different camera bodies: the Sony Alpha 6000, the Sony a7 II, the a7 III, and lastly, what I'm currently owning, the a7 IV. And they all have one thing in common, and that is that they didn't make my photos any better. So I'm not making this video to shame anyone for buying a new camera. I just want to share the skill that allows me to take photos I'm proud of, regardless of where I am. And that skill is observation, because photography is an art of observing and capturing fleeting moments. So I'm gonna split this video into 3 sections, each dedicated to one of the 3 pillars you need to understand to become a better observer and photographer. Okay, so the first pillar of great observation is curiosity. Because 99% of the time, the reason our photos feel boring is because we ourselves are bored. And that happens if you always follow the same routines. So maybe you feel that your photos are boring because you always go for the same kinds of shots. Or you always shoot in the same spots, so you can't even find anything interesting to shoot anymore. In these cases, you start to go blind to the interesting things around you because your environment has become just too familiar. But that's just like watching the same show over and over again. At some point, you'll just turn on autopilot and your thoughts kind of drift off. So you're not even paying attention to what you're doing. And then it's no surprise that your photos always look kind of aimless. So the solution is to intentionally break those patterns. If you feel like you keep taking the same kinds of photos, try to go for different motives. It doesn't even have to be an entirely different genre, it just has to be different enough so that you need to pay attention to what you're doing. Or if you're bored of your environment, go to a different part of town, for example, that you've never visited. And I did this last week and it helped me take photos that I actually like. Because I had no idea what to expect, so I just followed the light. And I've taken so many more photos that I like than I had in the 2 weeks before when I visited the good spots, simply because I would always go for the same motives in the same spots. But remember, this isn't about finding the perfect location or the perfect subject. It's just about putting yourself in a state of discovery. And when you're in an unfamiliar environment, your brain naturally pays more attention and you'll start to notice details that make things look kind of interesting. And when these things look more interesting to you, your photos will become more interesting as well, but only if you don't ignore the next 2 pillars. Okay, so you've broken your routine and you found something new to explore. But what do you actually look for? In my experience, it's usually light, because great photographers are masters of observation, and what they pay most attention to is light and shadow. And they don't just shoot in the perfect golden hour light, they are able to use any light you can imagine. But the good thing is, if you learn what I'm about to tell you, you will be able to do the same. So, firstly, observe the direction of the light. When most people start, they shoot with the sun behind them, which is called front light. But the issue is that front light often kills your shadows and makes your photos look flat. You can work around this by finding things that block the light in some portions of your image, because this creates a contrast that makes your subject stand out. I call this blocking of light, shaping the light in camera. And this technique is not limited to front lighting, it's just very useful in that scenario. But sometimes you don't have anything to shape the light with. And in that case, you can simply move so the light comes from the side. This side light creates a nice contrast between light and shadow that reveals kind of the shape and the texture of your subject and makes it look more 3-dimensional. Or for a more dramatic effect, you can put the light source behind your subject, and that is called a backlight, and it creates a kind of stronger contrast that separates your subject from the background, making it pop. Okay, There was a lot of information in a short amount of time. And the reason I'm kind of breezing through this is that I have a dedicated video to light in photography where I go more in depth about these different directions of light and how you can use them and how they impact your image, that you can check out via the link in the description. All right, next, observe the quality of light. It'll be either soft or hard. Hard light, like on a very sunny day, for example, creates sharp, dramatic shadows that make for interesting shapes. And it also allows you to hide distractions in the shadows. And that's where shaping the light comes in handy. Soft light, like on cloudy days, is often more flattering on your subject because everything is evenly lit and there are no sharp edges and there's not that harsh contrast. But this can also feel like very boring light because it's hard to make your subject pop on these days. So the key is to create contrast, for example, by using a dark background if you have a bright subject or a bright background if you have a dark subject. And I've got an entire video about shooting on cloudy days as well, so if you want to check that out, I'll just leave a link in the description as well. Okay, so the final pillar of observation is observing your subject. And for that, you need to not only find your subject, but also supporting subjects. And before you even raise the camera, you need to observe your subject and its environment. So look at what's around it and ask yourself if those surrounding elements make your subject more interesting or if they just distract from it. Okay, so I want you to think of this as an active choice. If a piece of trash, for example, or a bright object or a random person in the background weaken your photo, you have to get them out of your shot. And you can do that by moving to the side, for example, or by tilting your camera or just cropping the image to get the distraction out of the shot. On the other hand, if the elements around your subject add to the story of it and give you your context about your subject, you need to build your composition around them. So ask yourself, how can I include these elements in a way that looks natural? And then look for visual patterns like leading lines, frames like trees or doorways, or use interesting patterns like texture on a window, for example. And then once you've found your supporting subjects, build them into the three layers of your photo, like foreground, middle ground, and background. And by intentionally observing and arranging these elements in your composition, you're not just taking a snapshot of a subject, you're building your composition to tell the story of your subject. Okay, so let's bring this all together. So you got your camera, maybe it's a new one, maybe it's an old one, it doesn't matter. But the camera itself can't do the work for you. But you now have the framework that'll allow you to take photos you're proud of, no matter the type of camera you have. So firstly, you need to spark your curiosity. So break your patterns, walk everywhere if you can, and start looking at the world with fresh eyes by finding fresh motifs and new places to explore. And you don't even have to travel far. Going to a different part of town is often enough. Secondly, you need to observe the light and think about how it impacts your photo. Is it a bright sunny day or is it a cloudy day? And depending on what the light does to your photo, you can decide on different techniques to shoot. And again, I'm going deeper into this in the two videos that I'll link in the description for shooting on cloudy days and shooting on days with harsh light. And thirdly, give your subject context. So intentionally decide what to include and what to exclude from your composition to tell a clear story about your subject. And once you train your eyes and your mind to observe, you'll find great photos wherever you are. And if you think that's impossible because you live in the most boring place in the world, I recommend you watch this video next.